Hey everyone, it's Bill here again, and today I'm going to show you how to do a lot with a little on the piano. What do I mean by that? I'm not talking about some kind of hack or cheat, because doing a lot with a little is a really fundamental musical skill. It's a technique that all great musicians and composers and songwriters use. So what we're going to do is take 4 straightforward chords: F, G minor 7, B flat, and C7. And I'm going to show you how to play around with those chords in very small, simple ways, so that by the end of the tutorial you'll know how to turn them, with a little bit of practice, into a really cool, professional sounding improvised piano solo, kind of in a ballad or pop piano style, a bit like this. Now this tutorial should have something for everyone, whether you're a relative beginner or a more advanced player. For the advanced players and the music theory fans among you, I'm going to be mentioning some of the underlying principles we're going to apply here. Things like suspension, retardation, decoration, harmonic extension, polychords, rhythmic anticipation, and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But if you're relatively new to this kind of thing and those terms are unfamiliar, don't worry. All you're really going to need is some basic skill on the piano keyboard, and even if you're a beginner, as long as you can find the notes on the keyboard, you'll be able to play around with this stuff, learn a lot, and have a lot of fun with it. Let's get going. Let's start by thinking about our chord progression. F, G minor 7, B flat, and C7. If we were numbering those chords using Roman numeral notation, we would call that a 1, 2, 4, 5 progression. That's because it uses chords built on the 1st, 2nd, 4th and 5th notes of the scale of the key it's in, which in this case is F major. So there's the scale of F major, and the 1st, 2nd, 4th and 5th notes are F, G, B flat and C, which gives us F, G minor 7, B flat and C7. Okay, as usual, I'm building those chords using the notes of the scale, which is how we get that B flat in chords like G minor 7. Also, I'm adding sevenths to a couple of them, so instead of just G minor, we've got G minor 7, and instead of just C, we've got C7. And I'm not just playing them in their plain root position voicings. I'm not just going like this. Instead, I'm playing the chords using different shapes that fit together better. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in a second. Now, as a progression, 1, 2, 4, 5 crops up in quite a lot of songs. A really famous example is Back for Good by Gary Barlow, which was a massive hit for Take That back in the 1990s, if, like me, you can remember that far back. The whole chorus of that song is just 1, 2, 4, 5 chords in a loop, as it happens in the key of F major. F, G minor 7, B flat, C7, along with some interesting extensions and suspensions and such like. So let's do some playing around with that progression and figure out how we can use it to do a lot with a little. I'm going to stick the chords into a 4-bar, a 4-measure looped progression in 2/2 time with 1 chord per bar. So it's like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and repeat. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 2. You could count it in 4 if you wanted to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I think it has more of a kind of 2/2 feel, so we'll stick to 2s for now. To start with, I'm just going to do this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's really plain and simple, but pretty effective for all that. Okay, as I said, I'm playing chord voicings that really interlock easily. Yeah, there are no sudden jumps, so it's all really smooth. To start with, you might find it useful just to copy the shapes that I'm playing here. F, G minor 7, B flat, and C7, and just play it through a few times just to get the feel of the thing. If I were being lazy, and I often am, I might be tempted to call these right hand shapes inversions of the chords, but because I'm playing the root note of each chord as the bass note in the left, F, G, B flat, C, in each case the root note of the chord is the lowest note. Strictly speaking, all of those chords are in root position, so we're best off calling them root position voicings of the chords. Now, I haven't really put a ton of thought into those voicings, I'm just using my ear and experience to choose ones that feel and sound good. The only thing I'm not doing is making what you might think is an obvious step up in the left from the initial F and C under the F chord to a G and D under the G minor 7 chord. Instead, I'm going from F and C under the F to G and F under the G minor 7. Basically, that's to avoid two very kind of bare sounding open consecutive fifths. Yeah, fifths are a type of interval. We use intervals to describe the distance between two notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a fifth. And that's a fifth. Now, that sort of thinking, avoiding consecutive fifths, is a very big deal indeed if you're composing or arranging for choir or orchestra or whatever, but it's less of a big deal when we're improvising on the piano. Sometimes it even sounds cool, but I'm after kind of a smooth and mellow sound here, so I'm avoiding those really obvious consecutive fifths in the left. There's actually another better disguised consecutive fifth between the B flat chord and the C, by the way. Okay, it swaps between the hands there, it's quite hard to notice, but it's pretty well covered up, so I'm ignoring it. If you're relatively new, don't get obsessed about that kind of those kind of details of voicing. What I'm definitely not doing is playing full chords down here. Okay, notes this far down the piano keyboard have too many audible overtones to make comfortable chords. Yeah, they sound really sort of chunky and messy. So what I'm doing is sticking to these shell chord shapes, just using two notes of the chord spaced well apart. And a single C, because I've got a fairly chunky chord there in the right. Okay, so now I've got this fairly simple, chilled out kind of thing going on, just using my basic chord shapes. I'm also pedalling, okay, holding the sustain pedal down for the length of each bar, each measure, and re-pedaling at the start of each bar, and that's just to make everything flow more smoothly, to help me with my fingering, to give it a bit more ambience. Yeah, if I did it without the pedal, it would be much more detached, which might be the effect you're after, but here I want that kind of mellow sound, so we're using some sustain pedal. Now, what can I do to add some musical interest to this without going crazy? Well, one of the first things I can try is to keep the notes exactly the same and just play around with the rhythm, like this. Can you see what I'm doing there? The notes are exactly the same as before, but now I have this simple dotted rhythm in the left, if you're familiar with that terminology. It's pretty obvious if you count it out. 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 and. That second little stab of the left hand notes in each measure is in the final half beat of each bar. Okay, 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1. 2 and. So try putting that together. 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 and 1, 2 and. If you're a reasonably competent piano player, you shouldn't have any trouble with that. If you're a relative beginner, this might be beginning to stretch your hand independence a little bit. So at this stage, you should really practice and get comfortable with those two hands working together before you move on. Now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of interest in the right hand, like this. Did you spot that? Let's do it again. Can you see what I'm doing differently? Earlier I've been playing, so B flat to C7. This time I did this. And and I'm playing a plain C chord by the time I get there rather than a C7. I've taken the B flat out because the fingering's a bit more awkward if I leave it in, and I also quite like the plain bare sound of that shape going to the straightforward C chord. This is what we call a suspension. And a suspension is basically where you retain a note from the previous chord or from some other chord if we're using the term suspension in a loose sense, but we'll talk about that in a second. And you play it instead of one of the notes of the next chord, and typically it's the note that's immediately down from it, okay? And that's exactly what we've done. So we've gone B flat, but then instead of playing that E there in the C chord, we've held on to the F from the B flat and then moved downwards. We've resolved the suspension. Now, suspension is an incredibly common technique going all the way back to composers like Bach and beyond, and it's a really good way of making a really cool sound. You get this kind of little extra bit of tension and resolution as you travel between the two chords. It's really easy and it sounds really good. Suspension is a fantastic example of doing a lot with a little. We've actually created musical interest there, but not by doing more. We're doing less, we're moving less, I'm moving fewer notes at once, okay? So instead of moving all of these chord notes to all of these chord notes, I've just moved two and then followed with the third a beat later. Again, it's a really important idea, doing a lot with a little and creating musical meaning by doing less rather than doing more. If you like this style of playing, by the way, you might like one of my books. This one's called 7 Studies in Pop Piano, and if you can read a bit of sheet music in right and left hand, it'll tell you an awful lot about playing in this ballad style. It's basically 7 different piano pieces, starting very easy and moving to a more kind of intermediate level by the end of the book, and it's accompanied by a ton of notes and explanation going over all the really kind of important concepts in pop and ballad piano. It's available as a print and a digital edition, and you can find out more by clicking the link in the description text underneath this video or on the little YouTube card, the eye symbol in the top right hand corner of the video screen. Because suspensions sound really cool and are pretty easy, let's try adding another one in the right hand. A really obvious place to look at might be the start of the B flat chord. Let me show you what I mean. From the top of the progression. Did you see it? Let's do it again. Now, pretty similar to what I did on the C chord, what I've done is taken a note from outside the chord of B flat, the note C in this case, and resolved it up onto the chord note that's next to it. Yeah, it actually sounds a little bit better if we play it quicker here, I think, more as a kind of grace note. Let me show you what I mean. And again. Grace note, there we go. Okay, now music theory nerds, one for you here. Strictly speaking, what I've just done isn't a suspension. In classical theory, suspensions always resolve downwards, yeah, just like we did from the F to the E on the C chord. If it goes up, then it might be more accurate to call it a retardation, but things are getting more complicated here. That C isn't in the previous chord, although if you're listening to Back for Good, it's sometimes there in the melody, but that's another story. So rather than calling this a suspension or a retardation, we might be safest calling it a decoration of the chord, maybe. Now, really important, exactly what all these terms mean doesn't matter that much. It's the musical effect they create that matters. But I'm mentioning them because if you start discussing this stuff with other musicians or online, you know, if you're on Reddit or what have you, then you'll hear these terms bandied about with varying degrees of accuracy, okay? What they all basically mean is that we're taking a note from outside the chord, playing it instead of a chord note that is a single step up or down the scale from it, then resolving onto the chord note after however long, a beat, a beat and a half or whatever. In fact, you don't even have to resolve your suspensions and such like if you don't want to. You could do something like this. Let me do it again. You see what I did? I just stuck on the C in the B flat chord and the F in the C chord. I didn't resolve either one. Yeah, I'm now moving even less and completely changing the identity of the chords. So the C is now a C sus4, the B flat is now a B flat sus2. By the way, on the B flat we could also stick in the D, okay, which would create a B flat add 9 chord, but we wouldn't usually put the E into the C sus4. Yeah, that's too much of a clash between the E and the F, which are only a semitone and a half step apart. Doesn't mean it's wrong to do that, but it's a really distinctive sound, so most of the time you will probably want to avoid it. Let me just mention one of my very few iron rules of piano playing. Never spend too much time obsessing about whether, you know, this is B flat sus2 or B flat add 9 or whatever. Still less worry about whether any of the changes you make are allowed or within the rules. Yeah, what matters is how it sounds. Before you worry about the underlying theory, about the rules, listen to the music you're making. Always judge with your ears first. Does it sound good? Then it's good. But maybe we can make it sound even better. So let's make another small change. Again, we don't want to do too much that's different. We want to do a lot with a little. So this time around, I'm just going to play different right-hand voicings of the chords, just moving them up what would be one inversion if we were to ignore what's going on in the bass and treat them as whole chords. Yeah. So I'm going to move F from this position to this one, G minor 7 from here to here, B flat from here to here, and C7 from here to here. So in their most simple form, that gives me something like this, still using the dotted rhythm in the left. And again. Now let me play around with those shapes using some of the ideas we've talked about so far. Okay, let's go through what I did there. First of all, I decorated that first F chord a little bit, just by briefly holding on to the G, yeah? That second resolving up to the third, by the way, is a really common effect in pop piano, whatever voicing the chord is in, yeah? It kind of has its roots in country music and ultimately in church music, but let's not go into that in too much detail for now. It's just a nice little effect to use. Then I kept playing the A from the F chord over the G minor 7 chord. Okay, I was playing that A instead of the G. Now what's happened there? It's not a suspension of any kind because I didn't resolve it anywhere. What I've done is actually change the identity of the chord. Instead of G minor 7, I've got a G minor 9. I've still got that G down there in the bass, yeah? Again, don't worry if you create something like this and don't know what the new chord is called. Remember, it's the sound you're making that matters. But that's quite a nice sound, I really like that. Then I added a C to the bottom of the B flat chord to create B flat add 9, nice rich warm sounds. Okay, and then when I got to the C chord, I sat on this F and didn't bother resolving down to the E in the C chord. So once again I created C sus4. I could have done something like this. Okay, created very briefly an F passing chord. Okay, if I did that, by the way, I'd have gone to the true C chord in the final bar, not from an F passing chord to a C sus4, because that wouldn't quite have sounded strongly dominant enough if you're familiar with that terminology. Again, all of this is about using quite simple techniques and using your ear to check it sounds right. At the other extreme, I can be even more minimal in my right hand. I could just play a single right hand chord over all of the left hand changes, like this. You need to be a little bit selective about the chord you choose there. A good one is often the sus4 chord based on the 5th degree of the scale that the song is in. In this case, that's C sus4. So by doing that, I'm kind of doing even less, but kind of paradoxically creating an even more complex musical effect. I'm doing a lot with a little. I'm getting into really weird and wonderful chords, yeah? So like this one, yeah, we might call that something like B flat 6 sus 2, I guess, but it probably makes more sense to think of it as a polychord. One chord, C sus 4, stacked on top of another, B flat. You can create really interesting sounds by doing that kind of thing and creating polychords. And polychords themselves are not really weird and wacky and new. A lot of romantic composers back in the 19th and early 20th century really used them quite a lot. Another option on the same line is to reverse that thinking and play my standard right hand changes over a single note in the bass, what we would call a pedal tone. That has nothing to do with the piano's pedals, by the way, yeah, but it's quite a nice effect. I wouldn't want to do that for the whole song, but it's a pretty good effect to use, for a couple of choruses, especially towards the end of a song. Okay, let's pause and think about 3 really important principles that I'm applying throughout everything that I'm doing here. Number 1, I'm doing a lot with a little, more with less. I'm being conservative. I'm creating new effects with fairly minimal effort and minimal movement or change, often by moving my hands less rather than more. Number 2, I'm creating a smooth, graceful sound, or trying to, by choosing my fingerings wisely and using the sustain pedal, basically, as I said, holding the pedal for a length of a bar and re-pedaling with each new bar. On the question of fingering, I often get comments from people saying stuff like, you fingered that chord wrong, it should be 1, 3, 5. If you see or hear stuff like that in the context of this sort of piano playing, ignore it. There is no one correct fingering for any chord. It depends on context, on how your hands are working together, okay? So if you have got that shape immediately followed by that shape, then it makes sense to finger it like that. 1, 2, 3, so you've got your 5th ready, okay? Use the fingerings that help you get around the keyboard from one chord to another as efficiently as possible. Number 3, and most important of all, I'm always striving to be musical, to express something, some sort of feeling, even if I can't express it in words. So that means I'm thinking about dynamics, about control, all the usual basics of good piano playing that it's easy to lose track of when you're just focusing on which notes you're pressing. If you find that kind of smoothness and expressivity difficult to start with, keep practicing, work on your scales, it will come. Now what I'm going to do is just improvise on the progression a few more times. Watch what I'm doing and try to spot what's going on. I'm mostly going to be using techniques I've already mentioned, but in addition I'm going to be varying the left hand a little bit and jumping about a bit, but not much more, in the right. You might also notice me using a little bit of rhythmic anticipation in the right hand, occasionally bringing in that right hand chord change slightly ahead of the beat. Now that's quite hard to do smoothly, and if you're not careful it's quite easy to drop half beats or quarter beats as you do it. So I'd suggest you really practice all the basics we've gone over first before trying that for yourself. Here we go. So watch that over a few times, look carefully at what I was doing, then head to the piano and try this stuff for yourself. Remember not to run before you can walk. Get the basic patterns and movements under your fingers first, yeah? But once you have, keep pushing yourself into more difficult territory. Yeah, but try as far as you can to do a lot with a little, kind of in line with the principles we've been covering. Once you get to a good standard, move away from this chord progression, find something different, maybe a song you like, something in a different key, kind of introduce a bit of variety and extra challenge into your practice. Remember always to trust your ears before you worry about the underlying theory, and always seek to be musical. Don't be afraid of simplicity, yeah? I love chunky, complex, jazzy chords as much as anyone else, yeah? But you can get a lot of really lovely music out of simple, pure, open harmonies, yeah? Played well, you can get a whole universe of meaning into a simple 4-1 resolution. B flat to F. It doesn't have to be complicated to be beautiful. Okay, so there we go. I hope that was useful. If you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do hit the little red subscribe button down there in the bottom right hand corner of the video screen. That'll subscribe you instantly, and that way you will get regular updates of all my new piano tutorials on YouTube. Please also follow me on social media. Facebook, Twitter and Instagram links are in the description text underneath this video on the YouTube watch page. Also down there in the description text you will find links to all of my books, including 7 studies in pop piano. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions, I always try to reply to them. It sometimes takes me a little while, but I always try to reply. The best way to get hold of me is to stick a comment in the thread underneath this video. Finally, thanks to everyone who supports me on Patreon, my crowdfunding campaign. If you would like to check it out for yourself, patreon.com/Bill Hilton is the address. I'll see you next time.